Chapter 3, the theoretical foundations. So this chapter is really interesting because this is, instead of more of a historical outlook, this is more about lived experiences and how that impacts us and helps us become the counselors that we're going to be. So it starts off talking about self-schema on page 47, if you're following along with you in your text. Because of everything that has happened to us from the time that we were born up until now, things have scaffolded to connect. And when those connections are made, it causes us to have a belief system about how the world works, a belief system about how people are, and a belief system about who we are. And so that generalization that we see things in and how we think things puzzle piece together is our self-schema. The things that we need to be very mindful of as clinicians is that because of our own self-schema, we often have specific things that we are more sensitive to in discussions. We see some things as more congruent, like they go together, where other things don't. It depended on those lived experiences, the way we view the world. C, the third one, is recall. We are able to regurgitate information when it connects to something that we already have stored in our memory that we can scaffold it with. Next, the way that we believe things go is also the way we make the predictions in the way things are going to happen. What comes next, infer things that are going to happen, and the worst of these things about our own self-schema is that we struggle with something that completely contradicts what we feel is our belief system, or correct or congruent with how we see the world and how it connects together. And as a clinician, that's incredibly important for us to recognize what those parts of us are. And obviously the self-schema contributes to our worldview, which is the sum of all those beliefs, the big picture, the way that we vision the world working, the way that we see groups of people, family, state, our country, the world. And that leads to, if you put the self-schema and the worldview and you put that all together, then that leads to interpersonal style. And what's really important about our interpersonal style is the fact that we have to recognize that everything that we are, how we address people with our tone, how confrontational we are in our dialogue, how empathetic we are or we sound, and how comfortable we are socializing with people, being with people. The way that we direct clients in counseling, we develop our own personal style of delivery of all the theories and techniques that we have put in that toolbox. And all of us can have the exact same contents in the toolbox by going through these courses. But because of the self-schema, the worldview, and the development of your interpersonal style, those are all going to be delivered differently. And until you have developed that interpersonal style, the way that it feels will feel right once that is concrete for yourself. The next part on page 49 talks about the trans-theoretical model, which is the 5 stages of change: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. Pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. So why is this important as a clinician? Because when clients come in, we need to know if they are in pre-contemplation, which basically means they do not see that there's an issue to even work on. So they might be only there because somebody is, we're going to get a divorce if you don't go to therapy. You're going to have to move out of our house if you don't go to therapy. Court mandated because you've gotten some kind of trouble. So people that are unaware of the problems that are impacting them by the behavior that they're doing. They don't see a reason to change. They don't care to change. They don't have a desire to change. Those are people that are in pre-contemplation stage. If you're in contemplation stage, then you at least acknowledge the fact that there is an issue. Not ready for change, but I know that there's an issue. And then once you get to the fact that you recognize that there's an issue, and that there needs to be some change, and you're starting to think about maybe some specific things that you can actually put into action, then you are in the preparing to change. Once that takes place and you're actually working, then you become in the action stage. And then the final stage is once you've been in the action stage and have maintained that for 6 months or more, then you are in a maintenance phase. So the way that you're working with your client, the way that you're making goals with your client, the way that you're addressing them will also dictate by the stage of change that they're in, because they may not be ready to move forward. And those are important factors. That is a lot of times where the theories come in, because the theories allow us to utilize different theories and techniques because they work better for people in different phases and changes in their life. So you've got the person themselves, your personal style, different theories and techniques, and then you've got the symptoms and the stages of change that that client's in. And when you think about the theory itself, which starts on page 50 and 51, then you have to think about the fact that every theory that is worth its weight describes, explains, predicts, and guides. So the theory says this is why people are the way they are, and this is how this occurs. So that's that explain part. And describes it. Predicts, this is how we decrease the symptoms, and the guide is the techniques to get there. There are so many. I think in your textbook it says there's over 400 something counseling theories. One of the things that you'll see is you're only going to probably get like 10 or less, 15 or less, depending on if you do some systemic or some specific substance abuse theories in this program. Because the ones that we practice and the ones that we teach are the ones that have lots of efficacy and tried and true and do less harm to the client. So if there's ever a question of why didn't we learn more of these, why do we go over the same 10, 15 all the time, that's the reason. The less harm to the client and most efficacy. Been around a long time, tried and true. And so when we think about those ones, then they are the ones that, like on page 51, they have clarity to them. You can comprehend them. You can understand what's going on. You're able to test that theory. You're able to utilize it, and that you are able to draw conclusions from it. Now, there's different theories that are grouped in different categories. So the textbook talks about the first one, which is theories of human development. So all of us develop from birth to death. We go through these specific developmental milestones. And so one of the things that we have to recognize is thinking about, the first milestones, you're holding a bottle, turning it over, raising your head, crawling to walking, tying your shoe, dressing yourself, and you have all these milestones that you go up through all the way through adulthood, and even the ability to transition from working adult to retirement. Those are all developmental milestones. So your lifespan development theories all have a similar flow in the sense that they are developed in a way that they're supposed to process along a continuum of life lessons. Most of them have a consistent fluid flow to them. However, just like if you were in a specific field that didn't take off, you might have to recreate your career and go back to school, and that would kind of have you go back and recircle into some of the developmental cycles, again, finding your career path. So instead of it being perceived as a line that you go down like a one-way road, it wants you to think about the fact that it's a two-lane, it's bi-directional, because you can come back and loop around again. You can become a parent later on in life after you had already went through some of these. You can become a parent because of circumstances, even if it wasn't a birth child. So there's all these different ways that you can bi-directionally come back around and loop back into things. When we talk about the stage models going through these different developmental stones, the ones that you're going to see that have a lot of efficacy and that are discussed about in all the textbooks that you're going to see is you have Freud's psychosexual theory, Erikson's psychosocial theory, Piaget theory of cognitive development, Kohlberg's theory of moral development, Atkinson, Morton, and Sue's theory of racial cultural identity development. So those are the ones that those are the ones that are tried and true. Those are ones that are most have the most efficacy, and so you want to be very familiar with those. So when you hear those names, you know, oh, that's this, that's that. Incremental models, which are models that instead of saying you normally go through this development, and if you do it well, this happens. If you don't do it well, you can cause these symptoms. Incremental models are things that can happen at any time, but that are ingrained with us because of what's going on externally. So like reward pathways, behaviors being reinforced. That would lead us to more of the Pavlov's classical conditioning, Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, social learning by Bandura, Vygotsky's social theory, Bowlby's attachment theory, and information process theory. And so those are things that, because of something going on in the way it impacted us, when we're talking about increment theory models, those are the ways that we are created and experience life, and our behaviors, our thoughts, our beliefs are reinforced by the things around us. So how does understanding the developmental models, understanding the reinforcement parts of our world, understanding worldviews, how does that develop us into an actual clinician, and what do we need to be mindful of? Mental health counseling is a human condition. So every human has a mental health level, right? Every human has a mental health status. Now, the more models and the more that we understand about the person that's across that seat from us, the more holistically that we can see them for all that they are, not just some symptoms or not just a problem or not just a mandate. We continue to study because the way the world works, the way the world's impacted. I mean, think about the studies that are going to come because of just this pandemic, the decrease in face-to-face contact, the socialization factors, and how that's going to impact mental health. We have to always continue to research and identify these characteristics. The techniques that we end up deciding on for our clients have to be chosen for that client. They have to be modeled to that client, something that's doable, something that's workable, something that they can incorporate in their own natural environment. And then the last thing that we need to think about as clinicians is we know that we have these timelines, we know we have these developmental models, but we also have to be mindful of what happens when something doesn't go correctly, when you don't get those needs met, when you don't get those stages correct, when something interrupted the normal path, if you will. The textbook also talks about ways that we can be impacted. The textbook also talks about ways that we can be impacted in ways that we don't think about because we're not even in direct contact with it. So one of my favorite models is Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. And so it starts off, and if you think about like a dartboard, then you put the client right there in the center. And so that client is right there in the center, and that client is their own system. And the first system inside the smallest circle is the microsystem. This is the person's interpersonal relationships. These are the close relationships, closest family, closest friends, interactions on a regular, daily, consistent, maybe even under the same roof basis. And so that is something that when we're looking for support systems, we're looking at how that person is holistically, we absolutely look at that microsystem. The next system out, though, is your mesosystem. And the mesosystem is the things that you are linked to. So that might be more school, work, neighborhood, people that your parents interact with, that you're around, but you're connected to them, but it's not interpersonal to you. And that's your mesosystem. The next level out, your third level out, is your exosystem. And it encompasses those connections like the mesosystem, but they're the specific things where it has to be 2 or more settings. So it's when one setting is interacting with a whole nother setting. So you have a kid, and that kid normally goes to school. And so that's that normal interaction. But if you bring that home life, that whole parent family into interacting with like the school and the administrator and the entire school system, Board of Education, those kind of things, then you're putting 2 systems together, not just your interaction on that mesosystem. Then it becomes an exosystem. And then the last and fourth system is the macrosystem. And that is the things that happen around you, for you, to you, that are indirect. And indirectly, it could be a war. And the war indirectly could cause a chain reaction where loss of jobs, increase in prices, cost of living impacts. And so even though that happened maybe completely over into another country, it can trickle down and indirectly impact you, impact your home, impact your financial status. One of the things that Urie Bronfenbrenner brought to the plate that had never been thought about before as much in these systems was time. So we have what is considered your micro, meso, exo, macro systems. But what about time? So not so much, hey, these things happen, they were direct or indirect, but how much did it impact you because of the developmental cycle that you were currently in? So let's take something that's extremely tragic and trauma at any age. 5, 15, 25, 35, 55, 65, a loss of a parent. So if you take all those specific ages and think about the developmental milestones, the developmental process, those are all tragic at all of those ages, but how differently does it impact you depending on the developmental phase and process stage that you're in? So that's what Urie Bronfenbrenner brought. That was really something that he wanted people to process and think about. So this is where, taking that into account, he really wanted us to process the person, X-person, in the center of that dartboard, and how all these factors needed to be not only processed but understood, so that we would see the person holistically in their environment. The next section, if you read anything in your textbook, it starts on page 57. This is just one of those things you need to really read, process, think about in your own mindset what that means to you. Basically, on page 57, it starts talking about the fact that we can understand that we can really go in and we can help people have really positive mental health from the get-go, learn really healthy coping skills, be very holistically healthy people. The problem with that, unless you find grant money to do that with, nobody's going to pay for it. Your insurance companies are going to be like, If it ain't broke, we're not paying for it. Don't fix it, right? So in mental health, it's like something has to happen for us to react to that. Even though that we know that cutting it off before it happens is the better way, we don't have the abilities, unless we can write grants and do it different ways, to have that preventative services incorporated. And so if you look on page 58, it's a really good discussion about how they continue to put our billable services on more of a medical model. There has to be a problem, a diagnosis. There has to be a major issue before you can go in and see somebody and then begin to work on it. There is this misunderstanding that you're either okay or not okay. Your mental illness or mental health has to be on this continuum that one dictates the other. It's viewed as one-dimensional. So you either are symptomatic and you have a diagnosis, or you are assumed to have healthy coping skills and good mental health. And that's not true. Just to do one thing, I'm sitting here trying to do a video and I can constantly hear a dog in the floor, kids in the background, just like you're probably trying to listen and do all those things. Everything that we try to do is a little bit harder now. Does that mean we have a mental illness? Does that mean if we don't have a mental illness that we have good mental health? And that is where the confusion when it comes to services from our perspective as clinicians to payer sources is incongruent. Because we can understand that before there's a symptom, we need to make sure we talk about good mental health, how to keep that, being adaptable, being flexible, good healthy coping skills, all the things that would keep us from having possible symptoms in the future. And then if we do have symptoms in the future, we can come back to that healthier part. We don't have to be stuck in that one place. That is where, as a clinician, you have to really understand the struggle and what makes it so hard to get these prevention programs in the first place. What makes it so hard to have programs in schools where everybody learns these great coping skills and maybe could ward off tons and tons of mental health problems in the future. Funding and prevention programs. Because let's take something very simple. Let's take something, it's not simple, something everybody can grasp as an issue. Let's take teen pregnancy. Okay, so let's take teen pregnancy as an issue. So there would be the disagreement in what age do we need to start working with males and females about protection, safe sex, whatever topic you chose to do this grant program on, right? So you chose to do something and you're like, so we're going to start in third grade, we're going to start in second grade. What is going to happen is you would have to run a program from second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever grade you did. How many years are you going to have to run this program, this prevention program? Because prevention means prior to any issues. So you're asking for somebody to give you money to run a program maybe 10 years, to pay salaries, to fund everything 10 years before you can even say, maybe it's effective, maybe it's not, here's some data, before you can even give them some statistics. So that is our biggest issue with prevention programs, is that it takes so long. And then what if it does more harm than good? What if it's not a good program? What they do know is that good mental health, people that are characterized by good mental health, is a positive outlook on life, realistic set of expectations, effective managements, ability to function well with others, the ability to draw strength from others without being overly dependent upon them, reasonable appetites, a spiritual nature, effective coping skills, an honest self-regard and self-esteem, the ability to view the world honestly, accurately, and realistically. Now, this is on page 61 and 62. What I would like for you to do, honestly, is to look through that list of 10 things and ask yourself, how has that changed for you? So your different levels of prevention starts on page 63. You've got primary prevention, which we've already kind of talked about. That is prior to. A lot of your DARE programs are installed in school, stranger danger, all those kind of things are prevention programs. Head Start is the most effective prevention program that's ever developed. Secondary prevention programs are those after school type programs like Latchkey Kids, Kids at High Risk, those programs that have already got people like they're not there yet, but they've been identified at risk. And that's where your secondary prevention programs are. And your tertiary prevention programs, which is your programs that says these people are in not a good place and we're going to try to take them back to more of a maintained place. So it may be programs to help the homeless, mentally ill, crisis, stabilization type places. A lot of your mental health services are in that tertiary. People already have a diagnosis and we're trying to get them to a stable part of that, but they've already been diagnosed. And so that's actually the conclusion for chapter 3.